bed's on fire. Don't touch me, I'm a real live wire. Psycho killer, qu'est-ce que c'est? Better run, 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 run away. Oh.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Terror Obscura, the show where we look at the best and worst horror has to offer. In case you've forgotten, and who could blame you at this point, I'm your host, the Fear Fan. Yes, we've been away for a while, and I'd like to take a moment to thank those of you who have been patiently waiting for me to finish work on my new project, The Signal. As for those of you who have been impatiently waiting... Sorry. Still, it seemed oddly appropriate that such a delay should occur while reviewing Jason Takes Manhattan, a film whose very title promises a destination cruise, but whose execution seems to have forgotten what that destination might be. I'll give you a hint, it's in the fucking title. So for those of you who need a recap, and let's face it, that's most of you at this point, let's take a look at what Jason's been doing other than taking Manhattan. So far, he's instead taken naps, taken masks, taken spear guns, taken a lazy river cruise, taken a swim, taken a guitar and turned it into a percussion instrument, taken a walk, taken a spa day, taken a trip to the past, and even helps the class uber bitch take a look at the stuntman in the mirror. And, as he's asking her to change her ways, we finally get to see what the bridge crew have been doing rather than getting these people from Jersey to fucking Manhattan.
How old's your boy now, Carlson?
19 months.
Tremendous age. Take some advice. Don't push him too hard.
Ah yes, an extended heart-to-heart about parenting techniques. Well, at least you know it's good advice. After all, look how good the captain's kid turned out.
Have you decided on a plan of departure, Captain?
Apparently just as disappointed as we are at the pace of the trip, Jason sticks it to the bridge crew and shows that while he may have picked up a few new tricks, he apparently kept the whole wrong side of the blade neck slice trick from part 2. Understandably upset, Sean calls all the survivors to the bridge, including Julius, who's had not one line of dialogue so far.
I want you all to come to the bridge.
What the fuck is this?
Okay, one line. Wayne and hair guy, and the teachers. Lucky for us, he's also invited an expert on these things to explain the situation.
You're all gonna die.
What the hell are you talking about?
Jason Voorhees.
You know, I know we're supposed to see him as just a crazed deckhand, but what does it say about the rest of these people that he's the only one who actually knows what's going on? At any rate, Uncle Charles is none too appreciative of the situation and is quick to let everyone know how he feels, leading to this golden exchange.
Yes, a killer walks this ship, all right, and it's certainly none of us.
What are you doing?
You're the one who's insane.
Okay, when the crazed secondary character that the audience knows isn't the killer starts questioning your sanity, it's time to take a second look at yourself. And the best part of all this is that, from Crazy Ricky's perspective, that's 100% accurate. He just showed up to warn everyone, and the next thing you know, Charles pulls a knife on him for essentially no reason. In fact, it makes me kind of wonder how all the other Oracles of Doom feel when people ignore them just because they're pathologically compelled to deliver all their dialogue in a spooky old man voice. Anyway, now that the gang's all here, Julius quickly becomes my favorite character by giving us something this series hasn't had before as he organizes the survivors into hunting parties and actively tries to hunt down Jason. A little less proactive is Ava, who, joined at the hip to Tamara as ever, discovers that her friend has died the way she lived, staring into a mirror and probably trying to snort some coke off of it. Still, being a courteous kind of guy, Jason decides to help Ava once again follow in her friend's footsteps. Pursuing her to the ship's onboard disco, which is apparently a thing that still exists here in the far-flung early 2000s, he tries using his newfound ability to teleport and all the flashing lights to induce a seizure, but when that fails, it's time for Jason Voorhees to choke a bitch. Damn, I guess he killed the music too. And while there may be blood on the dance floor, Julius and his crew haven't been idle. They've gathered up axes, bludgeons, and guns, and it looks like Jason may just have his hands full. And I've gotta admit, I've wanted to see a group of survivors get wise early on and go all torches and pitchforks on him for a while now. Let's just hope that this common sense train keeps a-rolling.
What are you taking, Julius?
Nothing. But this gun.
Oh, thank God. Can you imagine somebody actually trying to fist fight with Jason? That would be just so stupid. Almost as stupid as that idea they had for a found footage Friday the 13th. I mean, what kind of idiot wants his hands full with a camera while Jason's skulking around? And we have a winner. Of course, one blast of steam to the face is all it takes to illustrate what a terrible idea this is, and Wayne soon finds himself shooting when he should have stuck to shooting, splattering that slab of beefcake Tamara was drooling over earlier across the engine room. Having slightly improved his odds of a date with the object of his affections, Jason decides to improve his chances further when, after Wayne discovers JJ's successful audition for Smash Mouth, he makes sure that sparks fly. Don't worry, kids, he's not dead. He just developed severe brain damage, moves to Aurora, Illinois, and starts a public access cable network in his basement with his buddy Garth.
Thanks.
Anyway, as Wayne brings the smolder, Jason is faced with a fairly unique conundrum. On one hand, destruction good. On the other, fire bad. Either he's developed a surprisingly solid grasp of fire safety, or he's back to his nasty habit of murdering random inanimate objects. I'll let you decide which. Although I will say that there is a strong case for him believing that only he can prevent engine fires. After all, when he encounters Sean's still unnamed bestie out in the storm, he does do his best to get him off the ship. Ouch! A little shy of the water there, buddy. Much better. And is it just me, or does Jason's constant teleportation during these murder scenes seem a little, well, familiar? Look at the deck. Now look at me. Now back at the deck. It has an axe in it. Now look at your man. Now back at me. I'm by the railing where you want to go. Now look up. You're on a mast. Now back at me. Now back to the mast. I'm up here with you. Now look at the ground. There's something in your chest. It's an antenna. You would wish you were not on the antenna, but you're dead. Old Spice. And, if you will, a moment of silence for our friend. Guy in purple jacket, we hardly knew ye. Mostly because you received almost no dialogue and no character development to speak of. And on the subject of shallow waters, everyone's favorite dampened distraction pops up to make Tyrannosaurus arms at Rennie before the supersized version arrives to force her to watch his Toxic Avenger cosplay. And while Rennie may not be getting the intended use out of her graduation gift, luckily the pen is still mightier than the sword, or in this case, the machete. Desperate self-defense ploy, or commentary on the quality of Stephen King's work versus Friday the 13th. You be the judge. And honestly, I've got to say, the dirty little trickle of lake water for blood is a cool touch. Sadly, it's one lost on Rennie, who's having a tough time putting two and two together.
I don't understand what's happening to me.
Hey, me neither. Jason never appeared as a normal-looking ghost kid before, let alone something Yoda would shit out. Anyway, Jason's fire safety awareness warnings were apparently unheeded as the fuel goes up and the ship begins to sink. Not that that deters Charles from continuing his vendetta against Crazy Ricky. Priorities, dude. Although I've gotta say, I think that this movie might actually be more interesting if it was told from Crazy Ricky's perspective. The psycho that killed his father shows up, he tries to warn everyone, then he spends the rest of the movie being hunted by a crazed biology teacher with a flare gun. Anyway, with the ship going under, the survivors finally decide to grab a lifeboat. Once Crazy Ricky gives Sean a last-minute demonstration of why it's not always a good thing to follow in your father's footsteps, everyone piles in, and Jason wishes them a quick bon voyage. And as for how the dog got in the lifeboat, I'm just going to assume that it's been waiting there the whole time and take that as proof that yes, the dog is the smartest one there. So once Julius shows up and they shove off, we find ourselves in a perfect metaphor for what's become of their original Jason Takes Manhattan concept. Lost at sea, in the fog, with a sinking ship on the horizon. Lucky for them, and us, New York is finally in sight, although it looks like a certain someone has been doggy paddling behind them the whole time. Still, as he heaves himself up onto the dock, it's finally time for Jason to take Manhattan. Today, Manhattan. Tomorrow, the world of professional hockey. But Jason isn't the only threat they face in the Big Apple, as they soon find themselves assaulted by the dynamic duo of random street tough and Latino Jake Gyllenhaal. Of course, they're a little low on cash after their high seas adventure, so they decide to take their survivor girl in trade, a move that leaves Sean a little nonplussed. Dude, spare me. Literally everyone else there did more than you to stop them from taking her. Hell, after the gun went off, you wouldn't even make eye contact. And story-wise, when your hero isn't cutting it, it's time to inject a heroine. Not what I meant. Still, Jason's on hand to provide a taste of the Crystal Lake DARE program, where kids learn the dangers of sharing needles, and Jake Gyllenhaal learns to just say no to the crack pipe. So as a smacked up Rennie makes her escape, Julius gets a call off to the cops before Jason shows up. He finds himself rising up, straight to the top, having the guts and getting the glory. He goes the distance, but is then forced to stop, just this man and his will to survive. And so here he is, facing Jason, and while he may no longer have his weapon of choice, he does still have option B. Time for his chance at the title. Round 1, fight!
Round 1, fight!
Your best shot.
Finish him! Jason wins. Fatality.
And while Julius is down in the dumps, everyone else is having a much better night, as Charles has come across a law enforcement professional who hopefully won't lose his head. And hey, while first responders do tend to have a tough time in this series, at least he doesn't have any of the other earmarks of Jason's victims, like being a borderline offensive stereotype.
You're right. I find it a tall tale indeed, but you seem like honest folks, so I'm inclined to believe at least some of what you say.
Uh-oh. And of course, Jason shows up to turn Officer O'Malley from NYPD Blue into NYPD Red. Lucky for everyone else, being dosed up to the eyeballs on heroin is enough to make Rennie into the hero the city deserves, although not necessarily the one it needs. As she does manage to run over adult Jason, but crashes it while swerving to avoid young Jason, who looks like he finally sat still in the makeup chair long enough to... Hey, wait just a second. Run that back! Holy shit, she didn't swerve. She was actually trying to run a small deformed child over. And sadly, it seems that the NYPD were all driving Pintos in the early 2000s, as Miss Van Duysen winds up extra crispy when the car inexplicably explodes. Well, you did give her that pen hoping she'd gain some of Stephen King's qualities, and she's certainly got Firestarter down pat. Still, either the drugs or the trauma finally get to Rennie, as she now isn't just seeing 10-year-olds drowning in their own fugly when she looks at water, but entire flashbacks. She learns she's scared of the water because Uncle Charles tossed her into the lake to teach her how to swim. There she was attacked by young Jason, who apparently left the only decent makeup prosthetics in the movie at the bottom of the lake. And although she may not be the best swimmer or the sharpest tack in the box, she and her uncle are apparently fucking Highlanders since Jason was 10 years old back in 1947 when he drowned, making her about 70 years old. Demonstrating the same great sense of priorities that have led the group thus far, Rennie and Sean turn on Charles for that one time 8 or maybe 65 years ago when he was a dick while teaching her to swim. They leave his ass for Jason, who promptly gives him a swimming lesson of his own. No wonder he thought that Rennie was fine underwater. The fact that we can still hear him making those sounds while he's completely submerged means that he's fucking Aquaman. And although Charles appears to forget how to breathe underwater, Jason's superpowers are still in effect, as his cockblock sense leads him right to Sean and Rennie, who's being consoled about how everyone leaves her, presumably also after being drowned in toxic waste. Being first-timers to New York, they make the hilarious mistake of running into the subway, where Jason is probably the 5th or 6th scariest thing they'll see. And I'd like to take a moment to say moving Jason out of Crystal Lake has had a big impact on the series. I mean, here we are, 15 minutes from the ending, and I haven't had to come up with a single joke about a shattered door or broken window. Well, you know what they say, you can take the boy out of Crystal Lake, but Also, I know I made a crack about Jason hanging around waiting for his cues earlier, but judging by his shadow, it looks like I was a little closer to the truth than expected. So once they find that the transit authority is seriously stepping up their fare collection, the two hop off the train, and Rennie provides us with the only useful moment Sean has in the entire movie, when she hurls him at Jason from off-screen. He lands on the third rail, and sadly, like Tina before her, she's unaware that she's just given him yet another extra life. As the two emerge into Times Square, Jason rises once again behind them, ready to deliver on the title's promise. Alright, here we are. This isn't some dock or a bunch of back alleys. This is Times fucking Square. And if you're gonna have a showdown in New York, it's hard to think of a bigger or better place. We're done with the half-ass skulking around and minor property destruction. This is the real deal. And I know I'm reaching back into the show's history for this one, but can I get a facepalm? Yep, that's right. The climax of the movie, the moment we've traveled across the ocean and waited an hour and a half for, and the only casualty is a shitty boombox. Hell, even the street punks who threaten him get off lighter than the random teenage girl he knocked over on the train. Oh please, there's no way his makeup can be that shitty. No wonder 80s New York had a reputation for rudeness. I'd be pissed too if I had to deal with this kind of disappointment on a daily basis. So, after briefly going Terminator 2 on a diner, we wind up in the sewer, where, if you look very carefully, you can see my hopes and expectations for this movie floating by at ankle height. They stumble across a sewer worker who's quick to inform them that the sewers flood with toxic waste every night at midnight. Whatever, this movie's already given us dumber, so let's just roll with it. He offers to lead them out, but Jason shows up yet again, as Sean proves as useful as ever. Lucky enough, Rennie manages to attract his attention, then gives him a face full of a leftover prop from Chud. Really? Well, it looks like I owe those street punks an apology. I know I had my issues with the mask in Part 7, but this looks like a kid tried to carve a jack-o'-lantern out of soggy gray clay. I mean, look at that big goofy snaggletooth on the upper right. Anyway, as Snagglepuss there staggers around like a bitch, Rennie and Sean try to get the hell out of Dodge. Things look grim until a tide of dookie water comes along, and we get the first line of dialogue we've ever heard Jason speak. Well, guess we know why Jason spent the last 7 movies with his mouth shut. You know, I actually liked his voice better when he sounded like Betsy Palmer on helium. So once Jason's done wetting himself, literally and metaphorically, he gets hit with the tide of shit, which, somewhat amazingly, proves more effective than anything else that's been thrown at him. Holy crap, I guess it must have been Taco Tuesday. I don't know what you've been eating, New York, but when your sewage is powerful enough to melt a fully grown man, you need to consider going vegan. And as the tides recede, we learn what Jason Voorhees was apparently sticking around for. The only thing it took to calm his unquiet spirit was a bath in toxic shit. Leaving the corpse of a 10-year-old boy that drowned 50 years ago for a very confused sanitation worker to find, the two hit the streets of New York. Sean suggests doing some sightseeing, and before Rennie can administer a well-deserved slap for wanting to be a tourist when everything they ever loved is fucking dead, the dog shows up to distract them. Good thing he was wearing the right gang colors. By the way, Toby's now the head of a chapter of Bloods, so you probably don't want to fuck with him. Anyway, that's Friday the 13th, Part 8. And while it's definitely the least among equals, it's still got enough redeeming qualities to make it worth an occasional watch, especially when you consider that its sins are mostly not its own fault. Jason Takes Manhattan faced trouble from the very start. With studio executives looking to pinch every penny, even the simplest of things became a battle. With most of the film shooting in Vancouver to save costs, the director actually had to fight for the casting of Kane Hodder, as the studio initially refused to pay for a Canadian work visa for him. Instead, they wanted Ken Kersinger, who would eventually get his chance to play Jason, but not until the inevitable showdown with everyone's favorite dream monster. In this film, though, the support for Hodder eventually won out, and the entire conflict was memorialized in the diner scene where Kersinger plays the cook. And while that's a minor example, the major one is what helps to sink this movie. In the original script, Jason Takes Manhattan more than lived up to its title. The boat segment was just set up for their arrival, and the rest was what we expected. A red-eye nightmare run through the city that never sleeps, with scenes at all the landmarks you know and love. The Empire State Building, the fight with Julius took place at Madison Square Garden, there was even a battle at the Statue of Liberty. But the writer's ambitious script outstriped the producer's less ambitious budget, with the high cost of New York reducing those segments to 50% of the script, and finally to 25%. And it really is that change that kills the movie, though not necessarily for the reasons that you'd expect. One of the consequences of gradually rolling more and more of the New York material back means that there was consequently more and more boat material. The end result is that it feels like someone tried very hard to squeeze two films into one, each at the expense of the other, and the film's overlong 140-minute runtime is a testament to that. And as much as it pains me to admit it, this might have been a much better film if they just cut the New York material entirely. Hear me out. By the time the film was shooting, it was clear we'd be spending an hour on the boat, and that most of the material that made up the New York section was going to be cut. By insisting on keeping it, the rest of the film falls by the wayside as the audience keeps wondering when we're getting to New York. Plus, it ate up a solid chunk of the screen time that could have been used to make the characters more likable. As it is, the characters are thin even by series standards, with each of them getting the bare minimum of screen time and dialogue to establish character. I actually took the liberty of reading the screenplay for this, and there is a lot of extra character stuff that got cut. Also, if you're going to do something as big as New York, it has to be, well, as big as New York. Give us Jason rampaging in Times Square, scaling the Empire State Building King Kong style, knocking Julius's block off at Madison Square Garden. Don't give us some alleys, a diner, and 2 sets of underground tunnels and expect us to be satisfied. Put up or shut up, for God's sake. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't complained yet about one of the things that people seem to hate about this movie. The inclusion of the Ghost Boy and the shift in Jason's nature, such as the ability to teleport. Well, after repeated viewings for this review, I've come to understand what they were going for, even if it is badly executed. At first, I, like everyone else, couldn't understand why little boy Jason kept popping up, let alone why he looks normal for most of the movie. The most satisfying explanation I'd heard up to this point was that all the young Jason appearances were just Rennie's imagination because she is a writer after all. That would explain why he only slowly grows more deformed as she realizes Jason never was a normal boy. That said, it never rang entirely true for me, since there's no way she would have known Jason was deformed if she imagined him as a kid while drowning. Instead, factoring in his more supernatural nature as an adult, his ghostly child appearances, and how he appears normal in some scenes, I think they're trying to retcon Jason as a normal boy who drowned and tell us that every appearance since he played Peekaboo with Alice has simply been his ghost growing steadily bigger and more malignant as years go by. When you look at it like that, the connection between he and Rennie becomes more obvious. Both of them drown because of the actions of negligent guardians, and the decent part of Jason has been reaching out to her ever since. This serves to explain Jason's changing appearance between movies, his unkillability, and how he seems to pop up wherever he wants. In addition, it also gives us an excuse for him to reappear at Crystal Lake after melting in a New York sewer, should another sequel be needed. That said, it generates a ton of other questions, like why he needs to steal clothes and masks, and how he was able to rise from the grave if he's just a blob of ectoplasm with a little boy corpse inside. Still, as far as explanations for Jason's abilities go, you could do a lot worse. Yup, a whole lot worse. Another thing I wasn't expecting was the way this film improved my opinion of Hodder's portrayal of Jason Voorhees. Yes, the makeup effects are mostly dreadful, with missing bits, obvious seams, and poor execution, but even with those flaws, I find I prefer the wet, bloated corpse look of Part 8 to the exposed bone and dry, leathery flesh of Part 7. It seems more in keeping with the idea of a boy that was presumed drowned and who's been stopped the last 2 times by being dragged to the bottom of a lake. Apart from the look, Hodder's physical portrayal is slightly toned down this time, with fewer swift, jerky movements and a slightly less pissed off vibe. Even the heavy breathing that I didn't care for in Part 7 is better here, as it's accompanied by the sound of wet, labored lungfuls of air being drawn in, as though he's drowning forever with each breath taking in water. Hell, they even eliminated the stupid ouchie sounds whenever Jason gets hurt, and I can't say how happy I am that there are no stupid sounds coming out of Jason's mouth in this one. Okay, almost no stupid sounds. Also, while some people tend to complain about some of the film's unanswered questions, such as what happened to the other students, and how did the boat get from a lake to the ocean, I find that there are a few hand-waving, blink-and-you'll-miss-it explanations. And while these realizations do make me wish for the movie that could have been, I still have to grade this film on what we got, which is, unfortunately, a bloody mess. Unfortunately, audiences of the time agreed, and while it still turned a profit, Part 8 had the distinction of being both the most expensive and least profitable entry in the series. Having finally drained their cash cow to the dregs, and with no clue what to do with it next, Paramount passed the rights to New Line in the hopes that they might be able to get the ball rolling on Freddy vs. Jason. But that's a story for another day, and thankfully I'll have a chance to look at a film that I love before tackling that mess. Anyway, that's all we have time for today. This is the Fear Fan, signing out.
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today.